what are the Jewish values in here, except that there's a white man, a black man who's masquerading as a white man and a Jewish man. So I suppose there's some Jewish issue there. We'll decode that when we get into it. But it's just such an intimate personal drama. This is something any human being should be able to connect with. It's just so profound. And I was so moved watching it again, observing the performances. Both of them are just stellar. They are so much the people they're portraying. And Anthony Hopkins, he just, even when he's not even moving, he's expressing something that's so appropriate to the moment and is so in his character. He's a very difficult man. Not only is he conflicted, he's at a point in life where he's at crossroads. And I don't want to ruin it all, but I want to go back to the beginning and let's try and see this through the lens of human beings, not just a black man who's masquerading as a Jewish man who's masquerading as who knows what, a nice, clean academic professor. Welcome, Arlene, if you can hear me. So the title is called The Human Stain, and I want to relate it to another film we've seen. Many of you may remember a Hungarian film called Those Who Remained, about a 42-year-old doctor in Prague who lost his wife and 2 sons in the camps.
That's what we
And
decided.
An 18-year-old girl, Judy, please mute yourself. And an 18-year-old girl who is in denial about her parents. She believes they're in a displaced persons camp in Sweden, and she can't accept the fact that they've perished in some other camp. So here are these 2 wounded people who find each other and remain platonic, but need each other in ways they both acknowledge, don't state so much, and come out the other side not only unscathed, but healed. Does anybody want to compare that to this movie? Let's start out with, how was Coleman Silk wounded as a child? What deep wound is he facing or denying all his life? Okay. Why isn't he a happy camper? Let me put it another way. He's expressing something that, you know, if he had been a Yiddish immigrant to Brooklyn or the Lower East Side in 1925, you would have believed him, because he's saying, you know, in my own country, I was me. Now I'm just a Jew. What can I do to be me and be seen as me before I'm seen as a Jew? Now, in that time, that was a very heretical thing to say, because people's sense of Jewishness supported them, they hung on to it. In the forewords of the newspaper, there was always the Bintel briefs about immigrants asking for advice on how do I cope with this new culture in our way, as a religious Jewish person or an observant Jew. So there's a lot of parallels there. And here comes this black kid, and he's different. Now, let me refer to my notes. When did you realize he was black? I can tell you the number of minutes in. Does anybody have a sense of when Susie, you're muted. You are muted.
I think that I realized he was black the first time they showed the family, when he went home and he said hello to his mother. She's a beautiful actress, by the way.
Yeah, Anna DeVere Smith, yeah.
That's
the first open disclosure, but there's 2 lines of dialogue from the Jewish boxing coach.
Yes.
Coaching him, and says, the guy from Pitt's going to be here. Let him see you box. But don't let him know you're Jewish.
Right.
Sorry, I'm wrong.
No.
Coleman says, my mother wants me to go to Howard, which is a historically black college. And then the boxing coach says, don't tell him that. If anything, he'll think you're Jewish because of me. Carol, did you have a question?
I was going to say that was the moment that was explicit. And the coach says, and I actually wrote it down, and he said, don't tell them you're colored, is what he said. Don't tell them you're colored.
Right.
He's going to think you're Jewish.
Right. So Jews are used to covering up all the time. They realize it, and they realize they can play it to their own advantage too. Back then, this is before World War II. He's in the high school, or he's about to go into the Navy, but it's either before the war or during the war. I'm not quite clear. It's been a long time since I read the book. So that mention of the boxing occurs. It's about 20 minutes in. So what was your impression of him until that time? Did you think he was Black? Did you think he was Jewish? He when does he meet Stina in the library? That's quite early. Stina in the library is around 20 minutes in. And she says to him what? The Jews are American too. So he's fooled her into thinking he's Jewish, but that's exotic enough for her because he's hot and he adores her. So he's already passing himself off as Jewish, and they're still students. Isn't that interesting? So the lie has been knit and closed. Nobody knows. And he seems to enjoy passing. Now, let me ask you this. Let's go back to how he seduces her. Or is it just who he is? What is there about young Coleman Silk that slides through life? Yes, he's smart. Yes, he's good looking. Anybody want to venture it? Here's what I think. I think Carol, go ahead.
Oh, I'm going to listen to your.
No, I mean, it's not only what I think, it's what you believe as a viewer, because that counts. If the movie didn't do its work on you, then it's the movie's fault.
He was very observant. He was asking of other people. And there was other deception and double identities from his father and all of that.
Don't go there yet. Don't go there.
But as far as how he passed, he was athletic, he was determined, he was bright, he was successful at things that he tried to achieve. And he had confidence. He just.
Right. He believed in himself. He believed in the picture of himself that he was painting for everybody. He said, boxing's not about strength. Look at me. I'm not, muscle like the Black guy beat up mercilessly. It's about being smart and outboxing, that is outthinking the opponent. Yes, Susie.
Did the scene when he's having dinner with the family and his sister and the father is all dolled up in that exquisite suit?
Yes.
Did that come before or after the boxing and his girlfriend?
Let's see, the dinner comes.
Because I think that's a very important scene.
It is a very important scene. And can you tell us why it's so important? Why is it so important?
I was confused by that scene because there's a line where the father says, "I'm not your father," or "if I were your father." And I thought, huh?
But he is his father. He is his father. Risa, do you want to explain why that's there?
He is saying, if you don't want to go to Howard, and if you want to be a boxer, I will be your father as I am, if you do well. And I say, congratulations, you won your match. But now you can stop undefeated. That's it. And I don't want to hear any more about it. You're going to Howard. So that's the way he said.
He was a very stern man.
He's just saying, he is his father, but he's saying, I will reject you. I will reject you if you go the boxing route.
Okay. Thank you, Risa. There's a little more to it than that. Jeffrey, you can speak for me. I trust you.
I'm hoping that we get a chance to talk about the references to the Greek mythology in it,
Sure.
Being named Athena, him being, the first lecture is about Achilles. He is a warrior, but he does certainly have a kind of Achilles skill. But so I hope we do talk about.
Okay. We're struggling through a couple of ethnicities already. We'll have to add the Greek to the list. That was a joke. Marina.
I believe the discussion of who the father is because the father is a little jealous of the influence that the coach is having on his son, and he understands that the son may dwell away from the family if he accepts the route that the colleges suggest, that the coach is suggesting.
Okay.
I think. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think there is another element that applies to both the father and the son, that the father says there's an aspersion that a white man fathered Coleman. It's a very subtle thing, but it's in that dinner argument that the white man, and so, you know, there's a sort of anger about racial origins.
Right. Let's go back a step. It goes back to when the coach, the white Jewish coach, is taking him out of the ring and saying, get ready for this audition because this guy could send you to Pitt. What else is in that scene? You're smart, you know, you can do this. He says, what about your father? Isn't he an optician? Well, no, in the Depression, he lost the shop. And then later we find out that he's not an optician, he's a waiter on the train. But that's not the reality that the family knows. If you look at his speech, he's learned, he's eloquent, he's pointed, he's also very mean and cruel. But he's wearing this elegant tie and suit, he's dressed up like he's a doctor, and he says, I have to get to the train. I don't want to miss my train, as though he's going into Manhattan, right, to his law practice. No. You know, he's a porter on the train, and then he dies immediately. So isn't this a different interpretation of the human stain? That even his father is trying to hide who he is to his own family. And how much heartache does that bring him and his mother? You know, until he dies, Coleman didn't know Dad worked on the train. He just always went to the train to get to work.
Did the mother know?
Yes, she knows. She acknowledges in that scene in the bedroom after the death. He didn't want you to know that. So the father is a complex character in that he adopts a persona of being overly stern, overly intellectual. I don't want to say overly dignified because that's not fair to him. He had a great sense of his own dignity, and he was livid about losing his optical shop and becoming a waiter on the train just to serve his family. So that, as Hannah DeVere Smith says, so you wouldn't have to do that. Brad?
You know, Philip Roth wrote a book called Exit Ghost. There's certainly the idea of the spooks in this story. And you can say that the Black Coleman is, in a sense, a ghost as well in this story, as is the other version of the father. That's the other ghost.
Right.
And many of them have ghost seconds or ghost avatars in this story. So the theme of the spook or the ghost is something very precious to Philip Roth.
Right. Well, again, he grew up, you know, Depression, New York, immigrant parents. They tried to assimilate. He was a staunch Jew, but not religious. It was an ethnic literary thing for him. I can remember when I read the book, I felt it was more about Roth exercising his demons than about the characters. It was more about him. And that's why the book was not as emotional as this film is. Bob Benton, the director, is kind of a cold, clinical director. He came out of advertising, and you know, it was all about the crispness of the image and the specificity of the message. And I'm surprised he did something as subtle. Of course, he's worked with, you know, he's working with Anthony Hopkins and a young Nicole Kidman, who was as vulnerable as any actress has been in a film. And he had great talent to work with, and together they all pulled it off. So yeah, everybody has a secret and everybody's hiding. But the point is, the father was hiding his own pain. They deprived me of having a middle-class career as an optician. So I'm going to try and live the life I would have lived had the white racist society and the terrible depression forced me to live, which is now I'm a waiter on the train. So there's a lot of anguish and pain on the dad's part. But would he ever intimately tell his kids that? No, because he won't admit his true job, just like Coleman will never admit his true identity. Even when he's brought before the faculty committee, as rank as they come, he won't say, well, I'm black, so how can I be racist? And Gary Sinise says this at the very end, the Nathan Zuckerman, who is a stand-in for Philip Roth.
Right.
Always a stand-in there.
Always.
3 books called the Zuckerman trilogy. I forget what they all were. I read them once and I said, I don't like the guy. You know, he's beating the same horse every book. But so Roth is very acute. He is acutely aware of how people masquerade and hide their identities, and how their new identity is all tied up in the lie. And it's a great observation of assimilation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like I said, you could have made Coleman Silk Chaim Weitzman, or maybe a different name, but a greenie on Orchard Street, and made him go through the same thing. Now, I want to call you, who's seen Oppenheimer yet? No, okay, Risa has, Marina has, Reiner has. Okay, a lot of people have. I haven't seen it yet. But I do know that his antagonist in the film, a man whose name was Strauss, but he pronounced it Strauss, because he was hiding from his Jewish identity. Oppenheimer never did. He wasn't an observant Jew. He was called a cultural Jew, which some people use as a dismissive term. I've been called that at times by people I don't respect, who call themselves observant. And Oppenheimer donated money to bring in Jewish scientists from Germany during the war. So he made no bones about being Jewish. He wasn't hiding at all. Whereas Strauss was playing the political game in the Department of Defense. And he was head of the Atomic Energy Commission. Fern?
I think that this movie and Philip Roth's book, and all of his books, in fact, are particularly typical of a generation that is not a more current generation.
Yes.
Of what many Jews who were the children of people who immigrated at the turn of the century tried to do, which was to become Americans. And in order to do that, they needed to hide, or they felt they needed to hide.
Mhm.
And it's particularly set in that time. I don't think it reads as well for a later generation of Jews, but it certainly reads beautifully for that.
Yeah, he was on the tail end of that generation. I mentioned this before. My father came to this country when he was 5 years old in 1920.
Right.
And his older brother, who was about 7 years old, decreed that the family would never speak Yiddish in the household to speed their learning of English. And all of them spoke pretty good English. My father and his brother did. They were, because they were so young, they lost their accents. They didn't lose their Yiddishism. And they were defensive Jews, but not braggarts, and they didn't wear it on their sleeves. Both of them worked in a drugstore, which they owned in a Polish Catholic part of town, and they didn't advertise that. Some people could tell.
I think that it's a character that Philip Roth was admired for the beauty of his writing and his story, as this movie is as well, but also loathed for it. He was a self-loathing Jew.
Self-hating Jew, right.
And
he worked that out in all his books.
All of his books. He didn't work it out. He talked about it.
But he was always looking at himself from behind his own back while
and
doing
looking at himself by how he thought that non-Jewish America was looking at him. I mean, Goodbye
Right.
Columbus was the essence of the self-hating Jew.
Right. And
There's
he picked out
There's
9.
actually a very funny line. At one point, the Jewish community, which originally had been very opposed to Philip Roth, embraced him. And he's had a very famous line when he learned that. He said, "What am I doing wrong?"
Right. Jews all over hated Goodbye Columbus because it was self-critical of Jewish suburban assimilated people. Right. And, it didn't help that hurt that, what's his name? The guy who played her father, Alan King, was so gross and so overstated. It was a terrible movie.
Yeah.
And but it literally interpreted Roth. And I thought what this film has done so well by a non-Jewish director is that he interpreted the human pain that was clear in the book. He used his imagination to go deep into each character to say, what would they sound like if they were really in person? And I was observing them not as a Jew, but as a compassionate, empathetic person. And I think and oh, by the way, it was written by who did the adaptation? A Jewish writer, though. Somebody look that up for me, please. Maybe I can do it. A well-known Jewish writer. And you look at the credits and you say, oh, that's why the script was so good. I don't think that he wrote into the script all of Nicole Kidman's breathing and sighing that were far more than sexual. It was the reverie that the intimacy put her into. She always sounded like she was on heroin in these moments. She was in another world. It was still her world, but it was astonishing where she went to go so deep into this injured, we'll come to her in a moment, this injured, pain, guilt-stricken woman, where she was reliving all those moments all over again with her husband beating her, losing her children, and her journey, it was quite different from Coleman's. She wandered and Coleman had a destination in mind and he accomplished it. Let me see if I can help you.
Nicholas Meyer.
Nick Meyer, okay. He was Nancy Meyer's husband? Is that right? Let me see. Let me see what else he's written. You'll know some of his work. I think he did a film on Freud. What? Oh, there's another film called The Human Stain. It's 7 minutes and it's a short. I clicked on the wrong one. I'm so sorry. Oh, I have relatives over, so it was a rocky start to the evening. That's one reason why we were so late. Let me see. We'll just go Nicholas Meyer. Time After Time. He wrote, what else did he write? Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, a bunch of Star Treks, but other than that, his credits started in 1973. You've seen stuff he's written. Elegy.
Fatal Attraction.
The Human Stain, Collateral Damage, Prince of Egypt, which is an animated film about you-know-what. The Informant, Voices, The Temp, Summersby. He's also written some books, Company Business, The Deceivers, Volunteers he directed, Time After Time, 7% Solution. That's what I was looking for. So, the guy has written a lot. He's not Aaron Sorkin, but he's very good. And I think he, as well as Benton, really made themselves vulnerable to feel what these characters were going through and didn't just take from Roth's book, which is to their credit. Because when you make a movie, it's just a starting point. It's going to come out differently at the other end, no matter what you do. And the more faithful you are to the book, the more you betray it, because then you're just adhering to the facts of the book, the narrative. instead of how is the movie narrative shaping up? What are the actors contributing to it? What are we able to portray and emphasize dramatically that's so expensive to do in a film that we couldn't do, that's so easy to do in a book? You know, convey tone and mood and a sense of scene and nuance to the characters. In a movie, people have to announce themselves very boldly. And they do in this. At the same time, they're still nuanced characters. So let's move over to Nicole Kidman. And what was your first impression of her? The first time we see her is in the post office, right? She's just a functionary. And she's giving him a hard time. What did you think of her from her appearance?
Sexy,
Sexy? Okay. Bit trailer trash?
kind of.
Yeah, from her dress. She calls herself trailer trash later in the movie. And then he comes upon her on the road and he takes her home just out of kindness, and she invites him in. And how does he react to that invitation? Again, we're not really going to talk about sex. We're going to talk about the meaning of sex to this character. They're two very different things. You know, I can have as potty a mouth as you want, but it's really about the character. Risa.
Very hesitant. This is not what was on his mind.
No, but
He was shocked.
right.
And when she left the door open, he said, well, let me go see what I can see. So
Okay.
he was enticed, but he wasn't running after sex.
First, he turns on the car as though he's going to leave,
He's leaving. Right.
and then he turns it off. And
Then he
goes
turns it off
And what is masterful about how Robert Benton, the director, photographs his arrival? Carol, you want to go there?
What I found was a masterful touch was when he says, no, I better not. And he starts his car and the windshield wipers start. And we know that he's reconsidering it when first the windshield wipers are shut off. And then we know he's going to go in and explore what this moment means.
Yeah. He's taking, excuse the egg-headed term, it's an objective correlative. It means it's in reality, it's the expression of what's on his mind. It's not just symbolic. And he tiptoes upstairs and the camera is a point of view shot, slowly going upstairs and then coming around the corner, you know, for the reveal of
Naked Nicole.
Nicole Kidman, who was expecting him.
I would say a beautiful body.
Yes, no, she's beautiful. That's not the issue. Again, it's not about the sex. It's about how could this 24-year-old come on to a 64-year-old guy like me?
34.
I'm kind of pudgy. Brad, you have experience with that?
No, and I'm just saying she's not 24. She's 34.
30? No, because somebody says, and when she's 34, how will you feel about her?
Right.
No, she's not 24. Well, I'm sorry.
She's not 34. She's younger.
Maybe I'm remembering the book.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. Sinise says to her, okay, that's after the great Viagra speech, which we can have fun with later. Sinise says to Silk, and how will you feel about her when she's 24? And Silk cuts him off at that point. And he's always changing the conversation and cutting people off abruptly. He's very assertive. He's like, he's not going to let anybody get to him. But again, this is Bob Benton's skill in putting us there in the scene and putting us in Coleman's shoes. You know, he still doesn't, it's not that he just doesn't believe his good luck. It's, can I do this? Is it real? This is before he takes Viagra, remember. He hadn't taken Viagra when he picked her up on the road, which is also like a reverse joke going back into the past. So he does this all on his own. And of course he's smitten, you know, and even if it is just sex, he doesn't know what there is about her yet that appeals to him. But she says, you have to go home.
I just looked up Nicole Kidman and she actually was 34 when this movie was made.
Oh, well, then the script is wrong. What can I say? Oh, she was 34, but the character.
We don't know how old the character was, but she was born in 1967. So
she was 33 plus 3.
I think 36.
No, it was released in 03.
Okay.
36. So she was close to 34.
Yeah.
And how old was Coleman supposed to be in that?
Well, he was close to retirement,
Was
right?
six-
So
well,
he was
you
over
can read,
64.
so he was in his early 60s.
Yeah,
I think that it is such an a confident kind of way that it can make a man feel in his 60s. I thought it was a brilliant scene. He was so amazingly sure of himself, but unsure of himself.
when he first goes upstairs.
Yes, he was, he projected to me that he wanted so much to go for it. He didn't know what was going to happen. And then I don't know if anybody else was as shocked as I was. I expected her to maybe be in her pajamas or something. I didn't expect her to be looking like a
Got your
Playboy bunny on the bed. I loved that scene.
Yeah.
It was so, it was actually, it was just really a good scene.
Okay. And then, of course, they cut to afterwards.
34.
They don't have to put us through the details. The point is the deed's been done, and
He
there's a
was-
difference. He's much closer to her.
His
And
character, I just want to finish my thought.
Yeah.
His character throughout the movie surprisingly makes us recognize what a gentle guy he is. He was so, from all that he went through as a young man and from all the turmoil that he had inside of him, he was gentle. He treated her with such sweetness. and
Well, okay. That's because he couldn't help it. And why? You're touching on something very central to his character.
Okay.
For all that he went through, he was trying to deny his blackness, right? He assumed a Jewish identity. He assumed an academic identity, which he deserved. I mean, the merit of his intellect is never in dispute here. But
I don't think that has to do with his niceness and gentleman's stuff and all that. I don't think that has to do with his ethnicity at all.
no, it doesn't. But you said confidence, right?
Yes,
Why was he confident?
because he knew he was smart. He
Not just smart. He knew he was passing for white or passing for Jewish or passing for an academic. He knew that the wall and the image he had built about himself was impenetrable. So impenetrable that when he was accused of racism, he couldn't confess that it was all a ruse. You see, he was confident because he had written the perfect essay of his own life.
Reaction.
Does that make sense? He had constructed a fiction that everybody believed. And as long as everybody was believing it, he was safe.
Oh.
But he knew he was vulnerable. Marina.
I think he was sure of himself with women even before he started passing as white. He seduced the
Stina.
fellow student so masterfully, and he actually asked her to do similar things for him. Can you dance for me? It's in both cases.
Yes.
We don't see his courtship of his wife, but he was very sure of himself as a man from the start and as a boxer. So apart from his identity as a young man, he was quite sure of himself. He just didn't want the vulnerable part, the human stain, to come through.
Right. But what was his fatal flaw? You just touched on it.
Well, if he shows who he is, then he loses everything. And this reminded me as I was watching the movie, there is a book, The Librarian, about the librarian of J.P. Morgan Library, who pretended to be white. And there is a movie, Passing, about a woman who lived the life of a white woman. So people who had to give up their families or pretend they were not who they were, and afraid to have children.
Oops, you just froze on us, Marina. Yes, there have been other films on the subject, but none as intimate. While Marina's recovering, let's try Frank.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. When the previous commenters talked about how gentle he was, I immediately thought of his boxing background. And then and what a dichotomy that is. And the point of, what Roth was trying to come across, what did the boxing element would seem so contrary to such a bright an academically inclined individual. It was an unusual characteristic or avocation, becoming very good at it.
Most eggheads don't box.
Most what?
Most eggheads, most thinkers.
Yeah, that's
don't
right.
become boxers.
And he was pretty much so, even at an early age. It was.
Why did he need to be a boxer?
Strength.
To defend himself against the reality of his life. That's why
The
when he
reality of his life.
being black.
I'm not quite sure I follow you. Would you further explain?
Okay, when he beats up the other boxer, the black man in the ring, that he was supposed to, the Jewish guy says, give the audience their money's worth, let them go for 3 or 4 rounds and then take them down. I know you're going to win. And he knocks him out in the first ring violently. He pummels the guy, he hurts him. Why? Isn't that the self-hatred that Fern mentioned? Isn't he taking it out on the other guy as a surrogate for himself? Isn't that self-hatred? Did that strike anybody else as that?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay, David and then Brad and then Frank again.
Yeah, it was such an interesting way to express it in a film, that he was really, that was himself, that was his self-hate. It's such a blatant image, such a blatant scene, so direct.
And what did the blatancy tell you about his feelings?
Well, that he deep under, if you don't accept your own identity, it's a kind of self-hate. And that he was trying to kill any last vestige of the black man within him that could erupt at any moment. And
and the violence shows you how extreme was his denial and how much he hated himself for the denial. So he's very self-aware, but not so self-aware he can restrain himself and take 10 extra punches to the head just to hold up a nigger, right? Totally shocking line. If anything, that's really woke me up, for him to say that. So he's really out in left field with himself at that point. Does anybody else want to comment on that?
Well, Jim,
Brad.
it's all consistent with the Greek tragedy imagery of this book, because, of course, he's patterned after Achilles, and Achilles was a warrior. This not only does the movie begin with that discussion of Achilles, whose female prize, Briseis, is taken away from him by Agamemnon. In the book, there's also a poisoned pen letter denouncing his relationship with the Nicole Kidman character, and it's signed Clytemnestra. So there's many Greek, this is a Greek tragedy in many ways.
Yeah.
And the Achilles theme is very central.
I would add to that, it's a Greek tragedy also in the sense that a person's fate inevitably works itself out. A hidden fate, no matter what happens, will work itself out and winds up in the end, everyone who actually came to grips with who they are and began to express who they are died. Mm-hmm. And that's a Greek tragedian motif for sure.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Ellison, did you have something to say?
Well, thanks for getting back to the Greek mythology thing that I brought up. He was an incredibly cruel individual. That scene with his mother talking about the future, if he marries a white woman and then they have a child, how does he know the child isn't going to be darker than he is? Is she going to have to sit in Central Station, as the child walks by? That would be her only contact with her grandchild. And he is incredibly cruel at that point. So I kind of take question of this whole issue of sensitivity. And I do think that at the end, when the human stain is perhaps lying to oneself and lying to others, that the stain, to some extent, everybody kind of admits the stain that they're living with.
Mm-hmm. It's a good observation. Let's talk about Fania some more. What is her stain? What is her pain and grief? Where does it come from?
Oh,
Risa?
the death of her children.
Okay.
And we don't know until that story happens. We don't even know which is true,
Right.
because Les is accusing her of killing them, and because she has that scar of committing suicide, trying to commit suicide
And the wrist.
with the wrist. You don't know. Did she kill the kids at the same time?
No,
No. I think the point is Les, in the wonderful portrayal of
He's
Ed
fabulous.
Harris.
But he raises that question for us.
He does.
Did she-
But he is a psychotic, and she says, "No, it's not true. A heater fell over." So
Right. I don't 100% buy that terribly much. And I also just go way back, because my hand was up, it doesn't matter. But I don't buy that he was an optician. I think that was his lie. I think that he carried that lie.
Oh,
for his
okay.
family
all right, that's possible. Yeah.
the same way that his son is. Because
Right.
he is that death was a causal thing. He had that heart attack because of what went on at that dinner. And he couldn't face the fact that his son was not going to go to Howard.
So he may not have been an optician, of course.
He may never have been an optician.
Right. Although the family could see that there was no shop or he had no job because it wasn't on a train. But this is like the sins of the fathers are visited upon the sons.
Exactly. And they are the same.
Right. And his father was spared the life of disappointment, except for Coleman, dying young. And Coleman has to live out his life for more years until, and I forget who we were talking with too about this. The fatal flaw is that his need for her was his fatal flaw, because it allowed him to be vulnerable. Right? He dove into this admittedly destructive relationship. And ultimately, he was playing with fire. She was fire. She was danger. Yet,
and he gave into that because he tells her.
He tells her, but the point is, it's human need.
Yeah, she was
Finally,
also,
late in life,
Absolutely.
he couldn't even tell that to his white, probably Jewish wife. He couldn't admit to her that he was Black. And there's no sign of children in that relationship. But it's this strong connection. He recognized her pain, his pain in her pain, even though they have totally different stories. He spends his life trying to hide his identity from himself, and she spends her life trying to hide in loneliness. She can't deny it. The ghosts are too strong. Carol?
This is a great discussion. It prompted me to ask a question and also first see that murderer was an accusation made twice, I think, and I need some clarification if you don't mind. One is the husband, Ed Harris, is called her a murder.
Yes.
After Coleman's father dies, and his cruel refusal to acknowledge his mother for his future, I believe she said, as she turns over her shoulder,
Right.
he's almost out the door, is out the door, she says murder.
Murder. Okay, what does she mean by that? Just
Did
help
she
us
say
out.
that?
She does say that, yeah. What does she mean by that?
I think she means, well, I think she might mean that you are to blame for your father's death. He was heartbroken. But also it could mean our dream, our successes, our achievements, you've stopped it right here and now.
You're killing me, and that's what makes them stop.
Any hopes?
Yeah.
Any?
Yeah,
No.
you've destroyed this family by
family.
walking out on us, by denying us, and by denying the part of yourself that we are.
You know, Jim, the conversation that they had before he walked out made me think about the Oprah interview with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, when they talked about how somebody in the royal family was wondering how dark their children could be. And that has to be something that any kind of interracial couple has to think about, and especially back in those days. I mean, now it would be way more accepted and not a very big deal at all, but I can imagine. I don't remember if he had children with his wife or not.
It's not stated. I
Well,
looked for that.
Brad is shaking his head. They did.
They did, Brad? You're muted. I don't remember the evidence.
In the book, they did.
Oh, okay. Well,
And the children looked white. There was obviously the
it
wife.
was a book, he couldn't tell. No, in the movie, they didn't acknowledge that, but in the book, it was acknowledged that they had children, but it doesn't commit to that, Brad? Whether they were.
I don't recall. I just remember that there were children.
Yeah. So the movie makes it, conveniently brushes that question aside, as movies will do to simplify the storyline. So it is remarkable that, so we've made some comparisons here, haven't we? The father and the son, they're in different kinds of denial. Kimberly, please. Unmute, please.
Oh, I'm trying to learn how to do this on an iPhone. So
That's better.
I wholly disagree about the father. And now my dog is coughing. I totally disagree about the father. I wouldn't say that he was hiding. I would say that he was a man that wanted some dignity in his life. And as an example, I had an uncle in Detroit who we would visit. And every morning he would get up and put on his suit, and his wife always shined his shoes, and he had on his tie, and he had his briefcase, and he had a newspaper, but he didn't know how to read. But he went on the bus to work like that every day because he wanted to feel like he was equal. And he actually worked as a houseman, as basically a servant in someone's home. So he would get there and change clothes. But it was just wanting that sense of, in this house, I get to be an educated Black.
Right. And he was, obviously, the father was very educated.
Right.
So it's a common human trait. We can cite examples like that so often, where people try to create the life for themselves they feel they are due. And you can't fault somebody for that, especially when they're smart, like his father was. The Reiners have a hand up and somebody else was waving. Joanne, we haven't heard from you yet, Joanne.
Yeah, hi. In all our discussions about the father and the son, nobody's talked about anger. I mean, don't we think that they were just angry, that they couldn't live their lives, that they couldn't be who they wanted to be, or who they should have been acknowledged to be?
Okay, this is how parents and children cross paths. They're both angry at the same thing, but can't communicate it. They can't find the commonality that they share. Right? In the father's pursuit of dignity, he chose to hide his occupation from his family. In the son's desire for self-identity and his own kind of dignity apart from being Black, he couldn't bring himself to say, Dad, to his mother, He says it after he dies, but can I just be me? But he wouldn't dare say that to his father.
Right.
Um,
But he wouldn't say it to the world either. He couldn't.
No, he
admit that
wouldn't.
He was black.
Well, but
There
this
had to
is
be anger. There had to be a lot of anger there for that.
right. This is self-anger. It's self-hatred. That's where the self-hatred comes from. I'm suppressing who I really am, and I can't stand it.
Right.
I'd much rather be free to be me.
Right.
Use the
I-
movie title I just quoted.
I disagree.
Okay.
I disagreed with him being a kind person, especially
Coleman?
Coleman.
Yeah.
Especially to his girlfriend. I don't think he was kind to her. I think he was attracted to her, and she had nothing else, so she offered her sex to him. But I don't think there was anything there. I don't think he was kind. I think he was just, he wanted that sex. He wanted the beauty of her. And that was the whole story there. It certainly was not anything that I saw that's really good. She certainly got something out of it, and he got something out of it, which is what he wanted. And he just was hiding things more and more.
Right. But you see, when two needy people realize they can get something they want from the other, they both go down this dangerous path together to
Right.
who they really are. The relationship threatened both of them, but they both found it irresistible. Go ahead.
And she actually became pregnant and had to have an abortion.
No, that was a rumor.
Pardon me?
That was a rumor.
That was a what?
A rumor in the
A
town.
rumor. Oh, I thought that was true.
No.
Oh,
Wouldn't
okay,
be
all
true.
right.
No, I don't see her allowing herself to have a child as part of her makeup at this point in her life. But my point is that need creates vulnerability.
You're
And
right.
both of them found a need satisfied by the other that was very dangerous.
Yes. I
And
agree.
that's why Coleman can tell off his attorney and fire him, and constantly shut down Gary Sinise. And he's so volatile because he's so defensive. He won't tolerate anything other than the reality, the explanation of himself that he demands. Jeffrey?
I want to go back to something, I think it was something David said, which was that this really was a Greek tragedy in the sense of this idea of fate. We are told by at least one person I can think of, his lawyer, who tells him essentially, what are you doing? That this relationship is going to turn into a disaster. The boyfriend is the ex-husband is crazy, he's delusional. You don't know exactly what he's capable of. So I just want to come back to that idea that this relationship from the very beginning was fated for a really bad ending.
Right. He had to give up the girl to be done with it, but he couldn't.
Jim,
That's what I mean by your need, your hunger, your desire, it makes you vulnerable. Who's waving their hand at me? David.
yeah, there's another element to it, though. It might just be a layer, but if you look at it in kind of a Jungian sense and an archetypal sense, and it's also in the Greek tragedy sense, like in the Bacchae of Euripides, where let's just keep it in this context, where she was a feminine force of sex, of love, of chaos, like Dionysus.
Mhm.
And that the only way this man, Coleman, was going to really live out his life and get to the end point of self-knowledge is to have his logical, his Apollonian structure broken by a Dionysian force
Right.
of
Good comparison.
of sex, of love, and of chaos. So in him meeting her, That's why I don't think it was just desire, et cetera, et cetera. He knew deep in his being that he needed to change. He needed to evolve. And sometimes evolving means you evolve to the point of death. And if he had hung out and just been himself, the lonely guy, he might have definitely would have lasted at least 10 more years. but he didn't. And so he instead he went in a way for self-knowledge and experience. And that's in the Bacchae of Euripides. That's what happens. The Bacchae come into town and everybody gets drunk, everything's thrown up in the air, and all chaos results. And again, I think that's the Greek myth that's underlying this thing as well. It's not just older man desiring younger woman, it's individual human being desiring to evolve
or accept the risk, accept the danger where they hadn't before. He's in uncharted territory and he admits it. He knows it makes no sense, but he can't resist because it soothes his own lie.
Yeah.
Because they recognize, hold on, Susie, because they recognize in each other that they are excuse the pun, safe space, right? Where they both can divulge and be themselves as they truly are. He's willing to risk that with her. Carol's been waving her hand, and then Susie.
Thank you. That was really a terrific observation. The word evolution in these characters, especially Coleman, I thought there was an artistic device in the dances. There were several dances, and as a young Coleman with a lot to prove and not all the time that would pass and change it, potentially change him. They were striptease dances with both young women in his life. I don't know what happened with his wife of many years. I don't remember a dance, but at the end, those two stripteases were very sexual, but I felt there was some evolution, and I'm not sure how to describe it, when at the end you see Nicole Kidman and Anthony Hopkins dancing in a non-sexual but almost tender, exhausted way. But and he danced with Sinise. He danced with his friend on the patio with abandon, like Fred Astaire. And there were different dances, seemed to be an artistic device to show how he was changing. Hopefully there is some truth in that. And that last dance was not sexual with a woman. It was, there was a mutuality, and it seemed almost they were spent.
I think there's an element of the dances because he's like Svengali, right? He's the snake charmer with the flute, clarinet. He's coaxing them. They are responding to his invitation. They want to please him. So it's this mutual satisfaction that is at work there in the dances. And of course, he enjoys the control. He it's an innocent part of Coleman. At the same time, it's a better expression of his self-satisfaction. I mean, the expression on his face when he watches her, when he's making love with her, is not lust only. It is, oh my God, I'm finally reaching that state of personhood where I can do this, and it's meaningful, and it's legitimate, and it's not just sex. And that's why he's so effective with the women, because when he looks at him, even as a young man, when he's looking at Stina as she's stripping, it's like, it's not just lust, it's connection. And it's connection in the way he always wanted himself to have, but also control in the way he wanted to have. With Faunia, Nicole Kidman, it's not control, it's more free flowing and more
Don't forget the dance with Zuckerman.
Yeah.
Nathan Zuckerman. Yeah, I mean, that dance was just fun and hilarious. I mean, it's not a gay dance.
No, that was beautiful.
Yes, it was. But as people letting go, Zuckerman is trapped too in his own persona as a frustrated writer. He's hanging out in the woods, hiding, right? And he even admits it. You know,
Such a male discussion of
his lust for this young woman to say that he became elevated by it and that he became more elevated by it. It seems to me a large part of this for men is avoiding death, avoiding
Yes.
aging. I don't know that he was becoming elevated. He was avoiding the fact that he was getting old.
That's exactly what Coleman says himself when they're listening to the Fred Astaire song. This is about fear of death.
Yes.
Right. It's like, I'm imagining all these things that will keep me young and alive, but what's behind it is they're not going to be mine anymore at some point.
He wasn't I don't see that he became more elevated by it. He was freed up by it, but
Well,
not
I thought you were
elevated.
making a pun about elevation. I'm sorry.
Okay, honey, I don't care.
Yeah.
Miriam,
And
Miriam, what can you share? Let Miriam speak.
Okay, Jim, 3 things occur to me, not hugely deep or significant, but one, why was he buried as a Jewish man? And where was any of his Jewish family? And were not people interested in seeing some of his Jewish family there, which none were? 2, at the end, did anybody know that he was a black man? Especially the professor who got up and said how much we wronged him, and spoke to a large audience.
No, he didn't know either.
And the 3rd thing was, let's see what it was. Okay, I can't. Yes, his death was not very clear. Was he run off the road because of her insane husband? They didn't find any tracks. They didn't find anything that led to the fact that the husband tried to murder them. Did he murder them? Did he try to murder them?
Okay.
Were these flaws in the movie?
No.
Or something that I could not figure out and was not clear to me?
Okay, it's fine if it wasn't clear to you. In terms of the last question, Lester was trying to scare them, but also he wanted to run into them because he said the plan was for all 3 of us to perish, right? But when Coleman hit the brakes, the car skidded away, which is what allowed Lester in his deranged mind to say, I didn't kill them. They killed themselves. Right?
I don't know if it's right.
He didn't
Yeah,
say-
well,
I think it's right. It's right.
It's
Yeah.
right, because you have the scene at the end where Les is on the ice. At the point where the car went over. At least that's
Well,
what
okay,
I read
go
it
on.
as.
Go on.
So he did it that way. There were no Jews because there were no Jews. He was passing as a Jew. And the black fellow who was on the academic committee
Yeah.
knew somehow, maybe they were friends from before when he was young, knew that he was black.
No, I don't think so.
He
No.
didn't say anything. He didn't say
Right.
anything. That's why he patted him on the shoulder, because he kept the secret.
No, it's critical. That pat on the shoulder as Coleman leaves the meeting is sarcastic. He's saying, thanks for, I forget what he
Thanks
said.
for nothing.
Thanks for nothing, right. Well, but the point is that Coleman appointed that man, brought him into the faculty, and there was no
You're right,
gratitude.
you're right, that's right. They were friends.
So they were certainly friends, but he did not know. And that's why he felt particularly guilty enough to say at the funeral service, I betrayed my friend.
I betrayed him, yeah. How did he betray him?
Because he didn't stand up in his defense.
Because he didn't say, but this is a black man and therefore he couldn't. No,
He didn't
You don't have
know.
to say that. No. He could have said, I've known Coleman for 15
Right.
years and he doesn't have a racist bone in his body. And this is nonsense. He
The whole
couldn't have known they were black. So please forgive him for using the term spook. But the black man
Right.
didn't say that. He said
That's right.
nothing.
Right, nobody stood up for him.
It's the whole point. When they came for me, there was nobody left to stand up for me. The Lutheran priest in Nazi Germany, the complicitous bystanders who do nothing are as
Either.
guilty as the perpetrators.
Yeah, Niebuhr.
So it's so interesting. We see this throughout our history, our living history, as senior adults now. Not that I was alive during the Holocaust, but it certainly made an impression on me.
A significant, hello?
Yeah.
A significant scene, and the only person that I recall knew he was Black was his first girlfriend that he took home, and the door opened up and there was his Black mother. But why did he do that? Why did he, if he was so not wanting anybody to know that he was Black, why would he take her to his house?
Well, I think it was a miscalculation of a young man who thought maybe my mother could accept her. You know, it's a total error on his part to think she could, because he didn't even prepare his mother for who the blonde girl was from Minnesota.
And he didn't prepare his girlfriend for what she was going to say. Was that
Arrogance? What can I say? This is a selfish person not thinking of how other people will react to a situation.
Jim, I have a question about that first girlfriend. They met at NYU, correct?
Yeah.
But I didn't quite understand how he got to NYU, since all the talk was that he would either go to Pitt or Howard.
Well, he enlisted in the Navy and then went to NYU on the GI Bill.
Okay. And I had one other comment to make, which I think is probably going to be heresy, but I had a problem with Anthony Hopkins' accent, because as a young man, the guy who played him spoke like a basic American. And then suddenly here we have Anthony Hopkins, who I'm pretty sure does know how to speak American, and yet he had this British accent, and I thought it was completely inappropriate for the character. Did anybody else feel that way?
Well, Anthony Hopkins is English, and he did the best he could with affecting an American accent.
Well, he did.
And it fits the role of an academic classics professor to be erudite and sound a little bit English. So it fits.
That's true. Okay.
You know, I always joke with my English friends that everything you say sounds more intelligent just because you have an English accent. And they howl at that. They know there are plenty of stupid English people.
Just the younger character spoke just regular English. So
yeah. Okay.
Not quite right.
Frank, did you have something you wanted to add?
Frank, you're muted.
It's the other hand, Frank, left side. You're leaning to the left. Touch the microphone, the red microphone. Okay, you figure it out, and we'll go to Iris next, and you can come back. But Iris, you have to unmute yourself. Come on, don't be Frank. Lower left corner, the microphone with a line through it. Just touch it with your cursor. Okay, Robbie's next until Chris can do that. Robbie, you got to prove me right. I know you know how to do this.
I can do it.
Okay.
I'm back.
Okay, Robbie first.
Oh, thanks. I just had a question. What do you think about them having the end of the story at the beginning of the movie?
Yeah, it's a choice. It's a choice. Well, it's fate. I mean, I'll go along with the classicists among us to say this was fated. It's a fatal flaw in the primary hero, in that he built his life on a lie, and this is what you get for it. So it's thematic. You know, frankly, when I first saw this film, I didn't remember that scene until it happened again. And sometimes first-time viewers don't get it. Maybe you did, but that's my explanation for it. Okay. And I forgive him for it. It's going to end badly. I mean, everybody tells him that. Sinise, the attorney, you know, she does. She says, leave me, please. And he says, don't you understand? I can't. And it's not because the sex is so great. It's because I need you. You know, it's okay. Iris, and then Fred.
I wanted to ask, I seem to recall that at the very end of the movie, he says to her, there's something I have to tell you.
Yeah.
And then never tells her.
He does. They come back to it. He does tell her. There's another scene, and they cut away, and then they come back, and she's.
And that is the only time where he actually admits to anyone that he's Black.
Right.
Am I right?
Yeah, he says it. He says it. You're the only person I've ever told.
And that
but
was the point. That was the point that I wanted to make, is that it's to this woman who it seems so ill-fitted for him. I mean, here he is, this academic scholar, and here she is. In the book, you get the impression at some point that she's absolutely illiterate. It turns out that she is keeping some kind of diary, as I recall. But the point is, they don't seem like a fit, and yet it is to her that he opens up, not to his wife, not to his colleagues, not to his friend Zuckerman, to no one but her. And
no,
that is
the other girlfriend also, the girlfriend that he brought home.
yeah. But later in life, and that is the kind of the magic of this so totally unexpected relationship that develops at the end of his life. And yes, there is fate, but there's a magical element here as well.
Right. How can you resist a man who's 60s, 70s, however old he is, because his wife has died and he's been alone? He said, I never expected this to happen to me, but now that it has, how can I not pursue it? She's not my first love. She's not my greatest love, but she's my last love. I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah.
Frank?
I'm back. I have just a small item to get your view on. Someone mentioned previously, where were all the Jews at the funeral, and what was Jewish about? They must have fabricated what they thought was a Jewish funeral, or get people involved to give him a Jewish funeral. Did you notice the flowers on the casket, which didn't seem very Jewish?
No. Well, Benton is not Jewish, so I forgive him that. Nor would the casket be allowed to stay above ground while everybody left.
Yeah, that's
So it's
true.
lowered.
So
And
it did not. It didn't seem true to tradition.
well,
It wasn't the Jewish funeral.
Yeah.
It's okay. Like I said, don't let the facts get in the way of a good movie.
Sure.
Okay,
Right.
8:51. Does anybody want to sum up? Did you like it? Did you have fun with it? Were you moved? That's what I care about. David.
I have two things to say about it. Not really a summing up, but I thought it was fantastic. It was really interesting. I sort of looked at it as I look at a lot of stuff in like archetypal psychology, and the idea that what Carol was saying is at the end, these two people in the non-sexual relationship are like, that's perfection. They both have come to realize who they are. It's the end of the road for them in terms of evolution, not elevation, but evolution. But the other thing I wanted to say, two things. Let's not forget Clarence Thomas in this whole thing, which I think is a pretty interesting correlate.
Okay.
And the second thing is there's an inverse.
Whoa, what about Clarence Thomas?
Well, I'll tell you in a minute, but let me say something first. I'm sure some of us saw the movie with James Spader called White Palace. It was based on a book by Glenn Saban. It was about a young college suburban guy who falls in love with a woman who flings burgers at White Castle, which is the notoriously greasiest, sleaziest, lowest hamburger place on the planet. And they have this torrid affair, and she's like 20 years older than he. But it's an inverse of this, in which the same themes play out in many ways. It's tragic at the end, not as tragic as this, but okay, that's it. And I just wanted to throw Clarence Thomas out to the wolves and see what happens on this one.
But he's never claimed he wasn't black. He just acts like he isn't.
It's a variation. It's a variation of a theme.
Yeah,
But he's absolutely self-hating.
Well,
one could make that.
Yeah, who knows the lies people tell themselves, and in a way that's what this film is about. He's a total cipher to me. Anybody else have closing comments? Risa?
It's very interesting. I enjoyed this movie, but I knew that I wasn't deep enough in it after the first run. And it's the first time I have sat down the second day and said to Stanley, you must watch this film with me. This is a deep film. This is excellent. And he enjoyed it thoroughly. And we
Good.
talked about it at length, because it had so many flaws in so many different people, and they all played against each other. I thought it was excellent, but I hadn't read the book. But
No problem. You shouldn't have, because it's very
well,
different.
is
But
it
you see, this
different
kind
enough to read? Should I read that book now?
sure, read it now. You may
Oh,
get
yeah.
something else out of it.
I think it was a great book.
Yeah.
Great book.
Better book than movie?
No, but it was cooler than the movie, but it's a beautiful book.
Cooler meaning colder or more hip?
No, colder.
Colder. Okay. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, Miriam and then Carol.
Miriam?
Lower left. She's going to get it.
No, she doesn't know.
She'll get it. Okay, let's go with Carol first.
A tag and just one other thing. One is when they are dancing non-sexually or asexually, and there was a
Forgot to unmute.
Wow.
I realized that
Forgot to
that
unmute.
was at the point that they had both divulged
They couldn't hear me.
their secrets. And
You're
that
right.
They knew each other's secrets, and that's when that was complete. But one question I had in the storytelling occurred at the ice fishing and the tools to ice fish. That was the one time, not when the husband came and was threatening, but that was the time I thought that harm would befall at Carrie Sinise, and that I didn't understand the context, why they chose that scene, ice fishing. I thought it had some other meanings that weren't obvious.
Well, this is where he goes to be solitary, where Lester goes, and he said, I'm thinking about my own son and how I wouldn't be lonely if he were here. And therefore, my wife killed him, that bitch. I can't stand her, and what do you people know? And what do you write about? And it's about people like you. And it's a summing up.
Yeah.
A question before we sum, please, Jim. Marvin asked me to ask you, what exactly is the human stain? Do people interpret it as they will, or does it have a very specific meaning and refer to something extremely specific?
Well, I'm not going to channel Philip Roth because I'm less of an egotist than he is. And it's the authors always take a risk when they assign a title to their work. And that's our province to interpret it. I think the human stain is the lie you tell yourself. And sure, it doubles as the color of your skin. But clearly everybody has a stain and tells themselves lies in this story. And that's enough for me. Brad?
Well, I would say that it's also an allusion to the Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton thing. Well, this is part of the American, it's the American trilogy that began with I Married a Communist and ends with The Human Stain by Philip Roth, where he's giving us a picture of America in the 1990s.
Yeah, yes, you're right. You're right there. There's all this.
And we're dealing with political correctness here.
Yes.
With the spook discussion and our obsession with morality.
Right. There is the Clinton theme, Lewinsky theme throughout. It opens with it about the three guys joking, walking across campus. Well, the moral is you should never take your guilt to a dry cleaners and expect them to relieve you of them, but okay, we're kind of running out of time. I told my final joke for the night. This was a great discussion. We rarely go this long, but it was spirited. And that's what I hope this film would do. I found it just remarkable in the intimacy that it took us, and it should be studied for performance and for direction and nuance. This film didn't need any words, and you would have understood quite a bit of it. Yeah. Okay. So at any rate, I'm a little behind, but I've seen so many really good films. I'm trying to wrangle in There's, I may have mentioned this is a film called Baron from Israeli about a Haredi family where the young bride is childless after 4 years and winds up getting raped. And then it's a question of who will accept the child she's pregnant with. Very great morality play once you accept the Haredi community, a la Steisel, where once you forgive these people for their crazy concerns, then you see the nuances of their behavior. And then there's a Holocaust drama set in the Warsaw Ghetto about an acting troupe that performs in a play. And it's basically a farce to amuse the imprisoned citizens of the ghetto. And it was an actual play that was written by a Pole and performed. The play was performed up until the Warsaw Ghetto was shut down and the actors who remained in the play perished. That's called Love Finds a Room, and not yet playing in this country. I'm trying to get it to us for a premiere, as well as the other one. I meant to ask, has anybody seen the notice of lost transport that was announced in the bulletin today and earlier? Yeah, it's like, it's compared to the films we see, it's not worth your time, but it's a lovely film. It's well performed, but it's a melodrama about a train of Dutch Jews that were transported out of Auschwitz because the Russians decided they needed, the Russians wanted them for the gene pool. The Germans wanted them for their gene pool. And it's all about how the Jewish emigres leave the train and take over a village, not violently, under the auspices of the Russian soldiers who liberated them. And it's kind of it just goes nowhere. It's a true story. And like a lot of true stories, they just tell the historical record. They just don't go deep enough. So, but it's beautifully shot and beautifully performed. And then there's a third one I'm trying to get for us. I can't remember the name now, but that will all come up. Don't know what we're going to do in September. Now, there will be no film at the end of this month. I thought we could do 3, but I won't be able to. That would be on the 31st. We'll do 1 film before the holidays, and then we fall prey to the holiday schedule. And this synagogue doesn't permit us to show anything between the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, nor before Shavuos. So we're going to have a dry month.
How about Sukkot?
Sukkot, sorry. I'm not observant. Not that observant. And that's right. Shavuos is the giving of the 10 Commandments or something.
Okay.
Torah. Thank you, Risa, our resident scholar. If only, I'd like to get Tamara to participate with us. She'd add an awful lot.
You mean
Like,
tomorrow?
Yeah. Tomorrow. She's great. She's smart and she's funny and she's sensitive.
Yeah,
What could be bad?
She likes films.
I'll have to work on her some more. This is a woman scholar, rabbi, I suppose, who's very knowledgeable and very enlightened, very reform, and a feminist, and just a total delight to be around. So maybe we'll convince her to be a guest someday. But thank you all for participating and making this a spirited discussion. No spooks here. We're all showing ourselves, and I think it's great. So you'll hear from me in like 2 weeks, and we'll have another program.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.